The mahogany frame had hung above my fireplace for 31 years. I was standing on a step stool, straightening it for maybe the 100th time since Eleanor passed, when my phone buzzed on the mantel beside me. I climbed down carefully, the way a 67-year-old man does when no one is watching, and picked up the phone expecting a reminder from my dentist or a promotional message from Home Depot. The number was unfamiliar. Nashville area code, but no name attached. Don't go to your birthday dinner on Saturday. They're planning something terrible. Leave town if you can. I read it twice, then a third time. The frame I'd just straightened seemed to tilt again without me touching it. Eleanor smiled down at me from that photograph. The same patient expression she always wore when I was being slow to understand something obvious. I typed back, "Who is this?" Nothing. I waited 3 minutes, standing in my own living room, the afternoon light coming through the front windows the way it always did in late October, warm and amber across the hardwood floors. Then I tried calling the number. It rang 7 times and went to a generic voicemail with no name recorded. My 68th birthday was 4 days away. My son Daniel had spent the last 3 weeks organizing what he called a proper celebration. A dinner at Arden's on the East Bank. Private room. 20 guests. Everything handled. He'd been uncharacteristically enthusiastic about it. When I'd suggested something smaller, maybe just family, he'd waved me off. "Dad, you deserve this. Let us do something nice for you." I set the phone face down on the coffee table and went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water I didn't particularly want. The message sat in my mind like a splinter you can't quite grip. Someone knew about Saturday's dinner. Someone had my personal cell number, and whatever they knew, they believed it was bad enough to warn a stranger. I spent the rest of that afternoon doing what I'd done for 40 years whenever something didn't add up on a project. I made a list. Who knew about the dinner? Daniel, obviously. His wife Nicole. A handful of Daniel's friends I'd met twice. My brother Frank in Knoxville. A few old colleagues from the architectural firm I'd retired from 4 years ago. The guest list was Daniel's creation entirely. He'd handled the invitations, the reservation, the menu selection. I had simply agreed to show up. I called the number again before bed. Still no answer. The second message arrived the next morning while I was walking the greenway behind my house, the one I'd walked almost every day for 22 years since we moved to this neighborhood. It was barely past 7. The air smelled like fallen leaves and wood smoke from someone's chimney 2 streets over. "I can't tell you who I am yet. Please trust me. Do not sign anything they put in front of you Saturday night, and do not let them take you anywhere alone." My pace slowed without me deciding to slow it. The path curved toward the small bridge over the creek, a spot where Eleanor and I used to stop and watch the water when the kids were young. Daniel had caught his first crawdad under that bridge when he was 9 years old. I'd taken a photograph of him holding it up, face split wide open with pride. I stood on that bridge for a long time. That evening, Daniel called to confirm Saturday. His voice was easy, cheerful in the uncomplicated way it had been since childhood. "Just checking. You're still good, Dad. Nicole's really excited. She's been looking forward to this for weeks." Nicole. I thought about that. Nicole had been looking forward to my birthday dinner. Nicole, who I'd always found pleasant but somewhat difficult to read, who asked careful questions about my real estate holdings the way an interviewer reads from a script, who had suggested twice in the past year that managing 7 rental properties was probably exhausting for a man my age. "Wouldn't you consider just liquidating a couple of them, Robert? Simplify your life a little?" I'd laughed it off both times. Thursday passed quietly. I went about my routine, had coffee with my neighbor Walt, drove out to check on the Gallatin Road duplex, where the hot water heater needed replacing. Normal things. But my mind kept returning to those 2 messages, turning them over the way you turn a stone to see what's underneath. Whoever was sending them knew enough to warn me. They knew Saturday specifically. They knew about signing documents. That detail bothered me more than anything else. Who brings documents to a birthday dinner? I called my brother Frank that evening and kept the conversation light, asking if he was still planning to drive up for Saturday. He confirmed he was, bringing his wife Carol. I mentioned I was looking forward to seeing him. I didn't say anything else. Not yet. At 11:15 Thursday night, The phone rang. I was still awake, sitting in the armchair by the window where I'd been pretending to read for the past hour. The voice on the other end was young, male, cautious. "Mr. Caldwell, my name is Marcus Webb. I'm Nicole's younger brother." I didn't say anything for a moment. I let that land. "I know this is coming out of nowhere," he continued. "I've been going back and forth all week about whether to call you, but I can't just sit on this." "Tell me," I said. "Tell me all of it." He'd been at Daniel and Nicole's house the previous weekend for what he thought was a casual Sunday dinner. He'd arrived early, let himself in with the spare key Nicole had given him years ago, and heard them in the home office before they knew he was there. The door wasn't fully closed. He'd caught enough to make him stop walking and listen. Nicole had been on the phone with someone, a name Marcus didn't recognize, talking about a cognitive assessment. "A specialist out of Memphis," she'd said. Someone Dr. Hargrove had recommended. The evaluation was scheduled for the Tuesday after my birthday. Nicole had mentioned my name. She'd mentioned the Gallatin duplex, the 2 commercial units on Charlotte Avenue, the house on Whitland, the vacation property in Tullahoma. She'd mentioned a total portfolio value and the words expedited sale in the same sentence. Daniel had been in the room with her. Marcus heard his voice, confirming an appointment. When Nicole came out and saw me in the kitchen, she acted completely normal, Marcus said. "But I've been around my sister long enough to know that face she makes when she's covering something." She was scared I'd heard. She wasn't sure how much I caught. "What exactly did you hear about the cognitive assessment?" I asked. "Something about establishing a baseline before any legal proceedings." She used the word conservatorship. I had to look it up, Mr. Caldwell. "I'm sorry." The word settled over the room like cold air coming under a door. I thanked him. I kept my voice steady, businesslike, the way I'd kept it steady through every difficult project decision in 4 decades. I told him I was grateful for his courage in making the call. I asked him one more thing before we hung up. "Was your name on the invitation list for Saturday?" He said no. Nicole had told him the dinner was immediate family only. After I set the phone down, I sat in that armchair for a long time without moving. The house was quiet, the way houses only are after midnight. I looked at Eleanor's photograph on the fireplace and thought about Daniel at 9 years old holding up that crawdad with his whole face lit up. I thought about teaching him to drive in the Bellevue parking lot on Sunday mornings. I thought about sitting next to him in the hospital when his appendix came out, and he was scared and trying not to show it. I thought about dancing with Nicole at their wedding reception, how she'd told me she was so glad to be joining our family. Then I stopped thinking about those things because they weren't useful anymore. I went to my desk and opened a fresh legal pad. Old habit from 40 years of architecture. When a problem is complex, you write it down and you draw it out until you can see all the load-bearing points. I wrote everything Marcus had told me. I wrote every comment Nicole had made about my properties over the past 18 months. I wrote down the 4 times Daniel had suggested I see a doctor about my stress levels when I hadn't mentioned stress once. I wrote down the evening 6 months ago when Nicole had asked me, almost in passing, who my estate attorney was. By 2 in the morning, I had 3 pages. The structure was visible now, the way a building reveals itself in early blueprints. They had a specialist. They had a timeline. They had a plan for my assets that didn't include asking me. What they didn't have yet was my cooperation. I made 1 phone call first thing Friday morning. Raymond Stokes, elder law, one of the best in Nashville, office on West End. I'd handled a property transaction with his firm years ago and had always found him meticulous, which is the quality I prize above warmth in an attorney. His assistant put me through within 10 minutes. I explained the situation without dramatizing it. Raymond listened without interrupting, which told me he'd heard variations of this before. He asked several precise questions about the timeline, the specialist's name if I had it, and the nature of my current estate documents. We met in his office at 2 o'clock that afternoon. I brought the legal pad. Raymond confirmed what I already suspected. A conservatorship petition required medical evidence of diminished capacity, typically 1 or more professional assessments. If that evidence was manufactured or arranged by a compromised specialist, the legal exposure was significant. If any documents I signed Saturday night could be characterized as transfers made under duress or manipulation, those signatures could be disputed. The safest move was to update my existing estate documents immediately, this afternoon if possible, with language specifically addressing the possibility of challenge. We spent 2 hours in his conference room. When I left, my will had been revised. My healthcare directive had been revised. Every major asset was documented with explicit statements of my clarity and intent, signed, witnessed, notarized. Raymond kept copies in his firm's vault. I kept copies in my car. I drove home through the Friday afternoon traffic and sat in my driveway for a moment before going inside. They wanted to prove I was losing my mind. The cleanest way to prove otherwise was to let them demonstrate, in their own words, on my recording, exactly how sharp I still was. I spent Friday evening rehearsing a performance I hadn't given since college theater 50 years ago. I was the lead in a production of Death of a Salesman my junior year. My acting professor told me I had a gift for stillness, for communicating confusion through the body without overdoing it. I practiced in my bathroom mirror. The slight hesitation before answering a simple question, the wandering glance, the moment of reaching for a word that is right there. Nothing theatrical, just the ordinary small erosions that people expect to see in a man growing old. Saturday morning, I called Daniel to confirm dinner. He sounded relaxed and happy. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Dad. 7 o'clock, don't forget." "I won't forget," I said, and I added just the right amount of a pause before saying it. I arrived at Daniel's house at 3 in the afternoon, unannounced, the way I occasionally did to drop off things or borrow a tool from his garage. Nicole answered the door in jeans and a sweater, surprised but immediately warm. She called back into the house for Daniel while I came inside, commenting on what a beautiful afternoon it was, setting my jacket over the coat rack with hands that I allowed to fumble slightly with the hook. Daniel appeared from his office looking pleased. "Dad, what brings you by?" I had a vague story prepared about a gutter issue and needing to borrow a ladder, which I delivered while looking around the entryway with an expression of mild distraction. Nicole watched me. Daniel watched me. I saw the quick glance they exchanged. I sat down in their kitchen, accepted the coffee Nicole offered, and talked for 20 minutes about inconsequential things. The weather, a neighbor's dog, a memory of a vacation from when Daniel was in middle school. I mixed up one date deliberately, put a vacation in the wrong summer. Daniel gently corrected me. I thanked him with the slightly lost expression of someone who has been caught out. "You seem tired, Robert," Nicole said, her voice carrying that particular texture of studied concern. "Have you been sleeping?" "Some nights are harder than others," I said. "Since Eleanor." She nodded slowly. The coffee mug warmed my hands. My phone sat in my breast pocket, the voice memo application running, the small microphone aimed toward the kitchen table. "We've been thinking about you a lot," Daniel said. He leaned forward with his elbows on the table, the posture of someone about to say something significant. "Nicole and I both feel like maybe you've been carrying too much on your own. The properties, the finances, all that complexity. I think I manage reasonably well," I said, and let my voice carry just a trace of uncertainty about whether I actually believed that. Nicole set down her mug. "Robert, we love you. And part of loving someone is being honest with them." She paused. "There are some really excellent doctors now, specialists who focus specifically on how the brain changes as we age. Preventive work, really. Getting a baseline." She glanced at Daniel. "We actually know someone who could see you in the next few weeks. Very discreet, very thorough." "A baseline," I repeated, as though considering the word for the first time. "It's nothing invasive," Daniel said quickly. "Just a conversation, some simple assessments. The kind of things smart people do proactively." I nodded slowly. "That sounds like it could be useful," I said. "I suppose at my age I should pay more attention to these things." The relief on both their faces was subtle but present. They believed they were on schedule. I borrowed the ladder that wasn't needed, thanked them for the coffee, drove home, and sat in my kitchen listening to the recording with a legal pad in front of me. Baseline. Specialist. Preventive. Complex finances. All of it there. clean and clear, in their own voices. I called my brother Frank in Knoxville. I asked him to arrive at Arden's an hour early on Saturday. I asked him to bring his wife. I told him there were some things the family needed to hear. Then I called Marcus Webb. I thanked him again. I told him if he wanted to come to Arden Saturday evening, there would be a place for him. "Are you sure?" he asked. I told him I had never been more sure of anything in my adult life. Saturday, I dressed carefully. The dark gray suit I'd worn to the Architectural Awards dinner 2 years ago, the one Eleanor had picked out. French cuffs. The silver links she'd given me on our 30th anniversary. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment before I left and thought, this is what a man in full command of his faculties looks like. Remember it. Arden's private room held about 30 people comfortably. By the time I arrived at 6:45, Frank and Carol were already there with 2 of my longtime colleagues from the firm, Gordon and his wife, and a handful of Daniel's friends I recognized. The room was warm and candlelit, white tablecloths, flowers along the center of the main table. It was beautiful, actually. Nicole had excellent taste. I had always acknowledged that about her. Daniel embraced me at the door with genuine warmth. Whatever else was true about him, his affection was real. That was the piece that had kept me awake at 3 in the morning when the rage had been cleanest and most uncomplicated. The love was real, and the betrayal was real, and both could be true at the same time. "Happy birthday, Dad," he said. The dinner proceeded beautifully for 90 minutes. I laughed at the right moments, told the story about the building permit in 1987 that everyone always asked for, shook hands, and accepted birthday wishes. Frank sat across from me at the large table and watched me with steady eyes, a half smile that understood something was coming without knowing what shape it would take. Nicole appeared at my elbow during dessert, quiet, deliberate, a folded set of papers in her hand. She sat down beside me and leaned close. "Robert, I hope this isn't too much, but we wanted to handle something while the whole family is here." Her voice was warm, measured. "It's just a simple document. A limited power of attorney, property management related. Daniel thought it would put your mind at ease, having us able to help with the administrative side of things." I looked at the papers. 3 pages, dense with the specific vocabulary of asset transfer. I looked at her face. Then I said, in a voice quiet enough that only she could hear, "Nicole, I know about Dr. Hargrove's referral. I know about the Memphis specialist. I know about the conservatorship timeline and the expedited sale." She went completely still. "I have new estate documents filed with Raymond Stokes's firm as of yesterday afternoon. And I have a recording of our kitchen conversation this afternoon that I believe Raymond would find very interesting." The color had left her face in a way that no amount of candlelight could disguise. I said, "Now I'm going to stand up and speak to the people in this room, because they deserve to know what kind of family dinner this actually was. You can stay and listen or you can leave. That decision is yours." I straightened my tie. I picked up the dessert fork and tapped my water glass twice, the way you do when you want a room to settle. 30 faces turned toward me. Daniel looked puzzled, pleasantly expectant. Frank set down his wine glass. I began speaking without notes because I didn't need them. I told them that I was 68 years old, and that I had designed over 200 buildings in 40 years, and that my mind had never been clearer than it was at this moment. I told them that I loved my son, and that this love was not in question and never would be. I told them that I had received warnings I didn't understand until I spent 3 days learning what was being planned for me by the people who had organized this evening. I told them, without dramatizing, what a conservatorship was, and what one required, and what it would have meant for a man who had spent 4 decades building something from nothing. I paused and looked at Daniel. He had stopped breathing, or it appeared that way. I told the room about the Memphis specialist, about the expedited sale valuation, about the documents Nicole had just placed in front of me, which I held up so the table could see. I set them back down without signing them. Then I said, "I want to be very precise about one thing. My son did not act alone, and I am not certain how deeply he understood what was being arranged around him. I am choosing to believe there is a version of my son that would not have signed his name to this if he had seen it written plainly in daylight. I am choosing to believe that because it is the only version of my son I am capable of living with. The room was quiet in a way rooms rarely are when 30 people are present. Daniel had his hands flat on the tablecloth. His face was doing things I had not seen it do since he was a small child trying not to cry in front of other children. Nicole sat beside me without speaking. She was looking at the tablecloth. Frank put down his napkin and looked directly at Daniel and said, very quietly, "Son, you need to think very hard about what you say next." What followed was not clean. Nothing like this ever is. Daniel said it was a misunderstanding, and then he said Nicole had told him it was for my protection, and then his voice broke apart in the middle of a sentence, and he stopped talking altogether. Nicole said something that began as a defense and ended as nothing, trailing off into silence when she understood how many faces were watching her. Two of Daniel's friends quietly excused themselves and left. Gordon and his wife stayed, seated, not speaking, witness to something they hadn't expected to witness at a birthday dinner on the East Bank. Marcus Webb was standing near the back of the room. I hadn't introduced him. I saw Nicole notice him and look away. I did not yell. I did not perform the anger I had felt at 3 a.m. I had moved past that, or it had moved through me, and what remained was something quieter and more durable. I told Daniel that I would be consulting with Raymond Stokes in the coming weeks about the legal exposure of what had been arranged, and that those conversations would determine what came next. I told him that I needed time, and that he needed time, and that some things could be rebuilt if both people wanted badly enough to do the work. I told him I loved him. I meant it completely. That was the worst part of all of it. I shook hands with Frank. I thanked Gordon. I walked to where Marcus was standing and shook his hand and told him that what he'd done required more character than most people ever get tested for. He looked at his shoes and said he hoped his sister understood someday what it had cost him. I told him I thought someday she would. The parking lot along the East Bank was quiet when I walked out, the river moving somewhere in the dark beyond the railing, the downtown lights reflected in the water the way they always were on clear October nights. Eleanor had loved this stretch of the riverfront. We'd walked it on our anniversary for years, before her knees made long walks difficult, and even after that for a while, because she refused to give up something she loved simply because it cost her something. I sat in my car for a few minutes without starting it. I was 68 years old. I had designed buildings that were still standing in 17 states. I had built a real estate portfolio over 30 years, with careful, patient judgment. I had raised a son who, for reasons I would spend a long time trying to understand, had allowed himself to be led to the edge of something unforgivable. I had a brother who drove 4 hours on a Friday night when I asked him to, without asking why. I had a young man I'd never met who had risked his relationship with his family because he couldn't carry a secret that heavy alone. The victory, if that was the right word for it, was not the thing I had imagined it would be. I had spent Thursday night sharpening it like a weapon, and it had done what I'd made it to do, and now it was just a night in a parking lot by the river, cold and clear and very, very quiet. I drove home the way I always drive home from the East Bank, across the Shelby Bottoms, through the neighborhoods I've known for 3 decades, past the Greenway where I'd been walking Thursday morning when the second message came. The houses on my street had their porch lights on. Normal evening, normal Saturday. No one on my block knew that everything had changed. I parked in my driveway. I sat there one more minute, looking at the front of a house I'd lived in for 22 years, that I would continue to live in for as long as I chose to, that belonged to me in every sense of the word. Then I went inside, turned on the lamp in the front room, and straightened Eleanor's photograph above the fireplace, which had been slightly tilted again. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon I didn't particularly need and sat in the armchair by the window. My phone showed one message from Daniel. He had written 5 words and then apparently deleted them and started over 4 times, because the message that finally came through was only, "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." I looked at it for a long time. I set the phone face down on the side table and picked up the book I'd been pretending to read for 3 days, and I found my page, and I read until I was tired enough to sleep. If you found this story worth your time, please like and subscribe, and share in the comments where you're watching from. For the next story, click the box on the left.